Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1244 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Sunday evening into Monday. Today's podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered the season with all the props, odds, and lines that you could possibly imagine. BetOnline is where the game starts. And today's show will be myself and Glen Willis talking about some players once again on the podcast. Today's show will be sort of a smorgasbord. Glenn joined me earlier in the offseason to talk about John Collins and Danilo Gallinari. We'll have much more to come on DeAndre Hunter and Kevin Huerter and all those players in the future. But today's edition is the sort of third teamers on this roster from this season, the guys who didn't play a whole lot, that kind of run the gamut from TLC and Kevin Knox to also the more future-facing pieces, Skylar Mays, Sharife Cooper, and of course, Jalen Johnson. So we have a conversation about all of those guys on today's podcast. And of course, we have much more coming in the future. Also to come, draft coverage. We've already talked to a couple of people on the show about the drafts. Andrew Kelly, most recently last week. And by the way, Andrew Kelly joined us also for a two-part fake trade extravaganza at the end of last week, which was definitely worth listening to or watching on YouTube. And that's a lot of fun reactions to that one, as I thought was going to be the case. And fake trades, not always my thing, but they are Andrew's things. We sort of talked about that for more than an hour last week. And generally speaking, offseason's very busy, even in this space. No games going on, but we try to stay busy with 4 or 5 episodes per week still, try to get you through the offseason. And then maybe in the dead zone, we'll sort of slow it down a little bit into August and September. But for now, full steam ahead on the Atlanta Hawks and across the basketball world. So please subscribe to the podcast across platforms. That includes Apple and Spotify, YouTube, of course, and other places. Leave 5-star reviews and ratings, etc. And after the intro, you'll hear myself and Glen Willis talking about all kinds of players on the Hawks roster this season.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I am joined once again by my friend Glen Willis, who's been helping me out quite a bit recently. And thank you for coming back, Glen, to talk about some more player observations from this last year. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back. Looking forward to it.
Should be fun. Our plan on this particular podcast people are listening to now is to talk about all kinds of guys. There are the prominent rotation players. There are basically 10, maybe 11 of those guys on the roster from this year. And elsewhere, there were other guys who didn't play a lot, but there are a couple guys, especially that we'll talk about on this show, that are very intriguing future-facing guys. So these might be a little bit different in terms of the player capsule evaluations. A lot of the other ones are kind of what happened this year, whereas this one, we'll sort of acknowledge that. But for guys like Sharife Cooper, for example, he didn't play enough to really have huge observations at the NBA level, so it's almost future-facing in College Park and sort of a smattering. So a lot of different guys to touch on here. I actually want to kind of start with Sharife, who played the least, just to kind of talk about him early on. He's obviously one of the more intriguing guys for fans, and we'll kind of save Jalen Johnson for a little bit later. But Sharife Cooper had an interesting season. He played 39 minutes for the Hawks this year, which didn't surprise me. They, of course, had Trae Young and Lou Williams and DeLon Wright, and they didn't necessarily need to go to Sharife. But, of course, he's definitely a hype prospect and a great pick in my mind when they got him and all that stuff. He played 34 games in the G League as well. Played pretty well, had some decent numbers in the G League, averaged like 17 points, almost 7 assists a game. Shot it okay, not great, but definitely solid enough for his standards. I'm not going to ask you to recite all of Sharife's scouting report from College Park, Glen, but what do you make of anything that you happen to see from him? And sort of also, broadly speaking, like, does it bother you that he didn't play more? Because for me, it was a kind of inevitable, but at the same time, I know a lot of Hawks fans would like to see him more.
Yeah, I mean, could he have played more? I think maybe a little. I mean, there may have been times where they could have gotten him out there a few more minutes. I think what bothered me a little more about even when he was on the court was they didn't let him really run the offense. He'd come down and give the ball up, run to the corner, and maybe come back into the play. And so I just wish they would have given him some actual live NBA reps on offense, when he was on the court. I caught a decent amount, of his G League games, probably close to 10 of them. And I thought he had a good season there. I thought he made progress. One thing that I thought limited him from being a potential guy that could be in the rotation, generically speaking, the point guard at the side that you just mentioned, was just that he's just a little bit slow, a little methodical, kind of coming into the season. Now we know he's from a skill set standpoint and talent standpoint. He's quick. He has some burst in the first step, and all those sorts of things. But the NBA pace is a thing that young guys have to acclimate to, even point guards. And I thought he acclimated and kind of moved well along in that area. So I think he had a fine, first season in the organization. I thought it was good that they were able to, use the nearby G League affiliate now to get him a lot of run time down there. And such, I thought the offense they ran in College Park, a lot of 5-out stuff, is suitable for example, how they might play with Okongwu, more down the road, or integrating Collins a little bit differently. You and I talked about him potentially, depending on how the roster direction, playing more at center and stuff. So I thought that was good too, and such. But it's funny that when I think about Sharife, with the NBA watching we're doing right now, I look at like what's going on in Miami using a guy like Gabe Vincent, a guy like Jalen Brunson in Dallas, and there are other examples too. It's just that's kind of what we're seeing. And one criticism I have of the organization over the last 5 years is that they haven't valued their second round picks enough. They haven't kind of gotten guys like Sharife, maybe when they've had opportunities to do so, to bring them in and have them kind of in that development pipeline. So when you see teams that have reached the conference finals this year, kind of the way that the Hawks did last year, but they're using guys like Dorian Finney-Smith, undrafted, like I mentioned, Brunson, a second round pick, and a really prominent role on offense for Dallas. And there's a number of guys, that are examples on the Miami side and such. That makes me wish. Well, first of all, it makes me hopeful for Sharife and what he can bring to the team, but it also makes me want to believe that maybe they're going to kind of swing back toward using those, mid-round second picks and maybe even potentially get a little bit more productive with their undrafted guys. So I hope he's on a good track. I think he is very capable of being a rotation player in the league. Probably not this year, maybe some exposure there, but by the end of year 2, going into year 3, I think he could be a very capable second backup point guard and show some good stuff.
Yeah, I tend to agree with all of that. I think that I would be intrigued to see how he would fare if he was just given a role. And that was never going to happen on this year's team, as we kind of knew, for a team that's trying to win. And rookie point guards, as much as I say the rookies are bad, rookie point guards are even worse generally. Rookie point guards just have a lot on their shoulders, and being a one and done guy. And I still believe in the upside. I think he can be a starting point guard down the line potentially. Not for the Hawks because they just have Trae Young, and that's kind of the thing about drafting him, which we talked about a lot a year ago, was like, it's great to have him close to home, but also like in terms of organizationally, there's only so much upside he can bring to the Hawks in particular because of just Trae's presence. But I think that obviously, taking him where they did was a good idea. And I saw some flashes too. He had some rough times, like most guys do. Even in the G League, it's not the greatest competition in the world, but it's still better than college basketball, and you're faced with different challenges and things. And defensively, I thought he competed pretty well. I agree with you. It's sort of a small sample, weird thing, but even in garbage time, it would have been cool to see him like run some offense. And we mentioned that during the season at times when he was playing. And he did play, basically a half season in College Park. 34 games is a pretty decent sample of professional basketball. That's good to see him like performing well and doing that. I'll be interested to see if they give him sort of that third role next year. Obviously, he's technically going to be a free agent. That's kind of been overlooked. I know I talked about it a few times because he's only on a 1-year, 2-way contract. I would certainly imagine he's back either on a 2-way again or on a multi-year minimum, something like that contract, but not for sure. I mean, I think it's going to happen, but I think it'll be interesting for me if they just obviously he's not going to be the number 2 point guard next year. That would kind of stun me for a team that's trying to win. But let's just say, Lou retires or Lou leaves or whatever, and they bring DeLon back or something like that. Do you just kind of plan on him being your third guy? Whereas this year he was really the fourth guy, maybe even the fifth guy at times. I wonder if that's a role that they'd be comfortable with going into the season with only 2 guys ahead of him, which I'd be fine with, I think, just because of the investment in him. But like realistically, you're one injury away from him having to play, 15 minutes a game, which I'm not sure if they're comfortable with yet.
Yeah, I agree. I would be shocked if he's somewhere else. I mean, we don't have to get into the details, but a guy on a 2-way contract going into a restricted free agency is messy, and it's really hard for those guys to kind of get away from the team if the team wants to retain them. But I think he's the kind of player that could grow, not too far down the road into being able to replicate enough of what they asked Trae to do in terms of kind of working with the bigs and pick and roll, being effective at kind of reading how the defense is playing that and creating leverage on offense. Not suggesting he's going to be an all-star like Trey, but I'm with you. I think like he's a guy, like if he's a full-fledged starter by like year 5 or something like that, that is not going to surprise me at all. And that's a great young player to kind of have in your development pipeline, and hopefully that's something that they kind of continue this year. I'm looking forward to seeing him in Summer League. Presumably we'll see him there. And just to kind of, and that might be the first chance for a lot of Hawks fans to kind of see him for the first time, apart from his garbage time minutes since last year's Summer League. So last year they played a lot through Jalen in Vegas and things like that, and it would be fun to kind of see him just be given the keys this time, and fun to see how that goes for him.
Today's show is brought to you by Sakara, and feeling your best starts with what you eat. Sakara helps you live a healthy and balanced lifestyle and truly enjoy doing it with delicious, plant-rich, transformational nutrition that builds a foundation for living in your best body. Sakara is a wellness company that's anchored in food and medicine, and it's on a mission to nourish your body through the power of plants. And Sakara gives you the tools that you need to transform your life with their organic, ready-to-eat meal delivery program and functional wellness essentials. They have nutritionally designed, chef-crafted breakfast, lunches, and dinners, and they're made with powerful plant-rich ingredients to help you boost your energy, support your digestion, curb your sugar cravings, and get your skin absolutely glowing. And plus, it's delivered right to your door, and it's ready to eat. Sakara's functional plant-rich wellness essentials help you create a body that you absolutely love to live in. From their best-selling Metabolism Super Powder to the Foundation, their daily supplement packs, Sakara's products are designed to help you support your wellness goals anytime, anywhere. And right now, Sakara's offering our listeners 20% off on their first order when they go to sakara.com/lockedon20 or enter code lockedon20 at checkout. That is Sakara, spelled SAKARA.com/lockedon20. 20% off their first order at sakara.com. One more time, that is sakara.com/lockedon20. I want to move on to his backcourt mate in a lot of ways, Skylar Mays, and we'll kind of quickly, probably a little bit quicker on these just because it's Skylar Mays, Kevin Knox, and TLC are on the agenda in terms of guys who played. TLC actually played a lot, but at the time, just given where he is in the organization, kind of looping him in here as well. But Mays kind of had a weird season in that he was with the Hawks most of the year, but also not playing. He played 220 minutes for the year, which isn't like a zero number, but certainly not part of the rotation after playing a lot more the previous year. And they kind of gave him the choice, kind of like they did with the other guys. Like, do you want to be up with the team? And he was certainly their emergency guy that they were more comfortable with. And I think it would have been less productive for him to play G League minutes than Sharife, for instance, who they obviously wanted Sharife to play. That made a lot of sense. Skylar is a young player, but he's not so young, as you well know, Glenn. He's a veteran young guy. Was he 25, something like that already? So I wonder what you make of him, because they also called him up officially to a full contract at the end of the year, making him a free agent again. And I'm intrigued by his future as well. I kind of long thought that Skylar was a rotation caliber guard on certain teams. Like if the Hawks had less depth, if he was your 4th or 5th guard, that wouldn't bother me at all. I think he's a solid guy. The upside's a little bit limited, but I think that he could be used more than he has been. I think honestly he might have been better than Lou at certain points this year, and they didn't do that for clear reasons. Lou being a veteran and all that stuff, but it was kind of a hidden season for Mays, because even the diehards that watch a lot of College Park basketball, he just didn't play a lot there either.
Yeah, he's just a competent guy, and in terms of what a person kind of thinks of him being on a 2-way contract as he was for most of the season, depends on what your philosophy is around 2-way contracts. Do you want what us older guys might call a taxi player that can kind of go back and forth as you need him to, and come in and play and be responsible in some real rotation minutes if there are injuries or what have you, and things like that? Or is your philosophy that you want to keep those 2 slots for true developmental guys, where guys have kind of they're not as advanced from a skill set perspective, but they have more size, and Skylar has more speed, more athleticism, and just need an opportunity to work with the NBA coaching staff to kind of bring the skill set along. So a lot of it just comes down to your philosophy. For me, I am most excited that he's not ending the season on a 2-way contract. You could tell from the timing of that he held out for a long time last summer, trying to see if he could do better than a 2-way contract. Now he's truly freed up to kind of go chase an actual contract from whoever might give that to him. I won't be shocked if he's not back, but just because he's a guy, again, that I think the thing that always works has always worked against him in Atlanta to a degree is that it's hard to put him on the court with Trey unless you're playing at minutes. He's playing minutes where the other team has mostly their reserves on, and it's just lack of size, lack of athleticism. Although he has a little bit of sneaky athleticism that'll show up now and then, and how he finishes at the rim, and things like that. But for coaches that just want to be able to throw a 13th or 14th guy on their roster on the court and they know how to play basketball. They know what we need from them. They will stay within the role that we're asking them to fill. To me, that is like the epitome of what Skylar is. And there's lots of room for that on NBA rosters around the league. He absolutely knows what he's doing. He knows how to play. He knows what's needed of him. He can do that, even if he doesn't have the size to maybe never be a guy who's going to be your 7th or 8th guy in your rotation all the time. And just, a lot of his athleticism you'll see is kind of straight line stuff where he gets to the rim a little faster, where he actually gets a little verticality, a little bit surprising, with the lateral quickness and stuff that shows up on D is a little bit limiting. But I'm excited to see him get a real contracted role opportunity, wherever that might be this offseason.
Yeah, he's a pro, and one of the things that he's even acknowledged, even last year at Summer League when I talked to him a few times, I wish he was just a better shooter. That's the thing about Mays, because he's not the greatest athlete, he's not the biggest guy in the world. He doesn't have enough offense in certain ways because he's not a great shooter either. And that's just one of those things. If he was 6'6", it'd be a lot easier in a lot of ways. Or if he was a great shooter, it'd be a lot easier in a lot of ways. And he's neither one of those things. And I like him, but he is well-rounded. And on the flip side, he doesn't have these great weaknesses either. He does kind of do everything pretty well. But it's just kind of tough for him to carve out that definite role. And I'm glad you mentioned the two-way thing because he is restricted. So if the Hawks want to bring him back, they could just give him the qualifying offer. But it has to be at least the minimum. So if they want Skylar back, that's a decision they have to make kind of now. Whereas last time offering him a two-way qualifying offer was a no-brainer. You just go ahead and do that. He's too good to not offer that. Yep. But now if you offer him a minimum contract, he can just take it. And now he's on your roster. So you have to actually want him to be on your team. And I think they probably do, but it's not a given anymore either. So yeah, I'd be intrigued about bringing him back. And like I said before, I think he turns 25 in September. So before the season starts next year, as much as he's only going to be in his 3rd season. I like Mays. I think he's a great end-of-bench guy. And to what you said earlier, the Hawks' philosophy in the last, in the time of two-way contract is that they generally have at least one guy on the two-way that is more of that plug-and-play veteran. Veteran's a loose term, but you know what I mean? More of that plug-and-play, lower upside piece. It was Josh Majette. It was Tyler Cavanaugh, and going back all those ways. And now even Shawnee Brown, who they signed to a two-way for next year, is a very similar guy. Shawnee Brown's not the most high upside guy in the world, but they liked him when they brought him in during the COVID madness. And that's kind of what they've done for the most part. Now, on the other side, they had Sharife this year, who's definitely more of a developmental guy, more of a ceiling play, but they drafted him and he kind of fell in their lap too. I think organizationally, it does seem like they lean toward kind of just having those guys as emergency level players that they can trust. I don't know if that's the right thing to do, but that's what they're doing.
And I think, and on the contract point, it's some listeners might think, well, just make a qualifying offer. The decision to make really is, do you want him on a fully guaranteed contract
on a roster spot?
Right.
Yep.
Right. Because he might be a guy who's more on a guy who gets a contract that's not fully guaranteed until the second week of January, when the league requires contracts to be converted.
The TLC contract from this year.
Exactly, and the Sullivan Hill from the prior
previous
year,
right? Yep.
Right. So that's where the decision is there. I think for the Hawks, which may make it a little more likely he lands somewhere else on a contract that's not fully guaranteed until second week of January. That could happen. It also depends, I think, partly on, do they think Sharife can be the third guy all year long? Because if that's the case, then there's probably less need to use a roster spot on Skylar, who could be that third guy, presumably, if they feel like Sharife's not ready to go right at the beginning of the season. So I think he probably lands somewhere else, probably. But if it is, I hope it's a great situation for him where he gets more opportunity than he did here, and I'll be rooting for him.
Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline, and our partners at BetOnline have the #1 source for all sports betting needs and information that you absolutely cannot live without this year and beyond. They have the latest odds, news, and developments across the sports world. That includes this year's NBA playoffs, still ongoing right now, Major League Baseball scores and odds. They have all the stuff that you want on fights and next season's futures in the NFL, college football, even college basketball, and across the board. BetOnline is the continued source for all the wagering information that you need in sports, and that includes live betting. They have casino games. They have poker. They have all the esports that you want. report, playoff viewpoints, and much more. And beyond that, BetOnline has other sports that have you covered across the board. That includes golf and tennis, auto racing, horse racing, soccer, cricket, hockey, of course, entertainment bets, and any sport you can possibly think of. BetOnline has it all. And head there right now today on your computer and mobile device to learn more about all the trends and the action across the sports world. BetOnline, where the game starts. From there, I want to get into quickly anyway, TLC and Knox, two guys who are expiring contracts, clearly different paths. Knox is a former lottery pick. TLC kind of bounced around and was on that non-guaranteed deal we talked about earlier, but ended up playing a lot. He was the guy Nate trusted more than everybody else that he had of his options. Played almost 700 minutes this year. Shot the ball okay. TLC did. Not the greatest guy at anything in particular, though. I want to hear your thoughts on what he can actually do or not do, but clearly an end-of-roster guy that they're not terribly attached to. Knox, they trade in the deal. They acquire in the deal for Cam Reddish, but only played 111 minutes with the Hawks. Didn't play a ton. Definitely a more familiar name. I know a lot of Hawks fans were like calling for more Knox at times because he's just, he's a good athlete. He's recognizable. Still pretty young now. The thing with Knox is, to make him restricted, they have to offer him a qualifying offer, which I just cannot imagine happening. It's like $9 million, and that's not going to happen. He's not worth anything remotely approaching that. So you have to let him not go off that. So which means to me, he'll be unrestricted as well. So those two guys were battling for minutes this year, not huge pieces of the future, but I wonder if you're intrigued by any of them in terms of bringing them back. I know every once in a while I'll hear someone that has Knox in their plans for the Hawks, but I wonder what you make of those two guys.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess maybe start with TLC because he was there all year long. I thought he gave them what should have been the expectation this year. Just, kind of overusing the word here with some of these guys, but competent, guy, good enough shooter that if you leave him wide open, he's going to knock down enough of those. And then on defense, he's big. I think he's bigger than some people would, think he is. Where I would contrast TLC and Knox is that TLC is a better help defender. He's better kind of pulling in from the weak side and using some of his size and strength. He's a little stronger in the post when he gets caught down there. He's a little better rebounder because of his strength and probably because of all the experience he had playing in Europe. And so I know fans, I heard a lot during the season, and I'm sure you did too, like, why is TLC playing? Why is he playing?
Yes.
Just like, he's a competent option. He knows what he's doing. He knows where to be. He knows where to play. And a little bit like Skylar, he's going to stay within that. And it's kind of funny if you look across his career, he's gotten up an impressive number of like 3-point shots for the minutes he's played. He's not afraid to shoot, and that's critical. On the Knox side, where I contrast these two is Knox is going to be more capable of like keeping a ball handler in front, where TLC is a guy you don't really want at the point of attack a lot. And that's where, and so that's the difference that I see there. And when you're thinking about a wing, I think, depending on the team and kind of how you're playing defense, some teams might say, I need a guy who could hold up at the point of attack and give me 10 minutes a game, like Knox might be able to. Other teams might say, I want someone who can help off the ball and show up on time in all the different help spots and things like that. So that's how I would contrast those. I don't know if Knox ever develops the confidence as a shooter that he'll need to have to actually be a rotation guy. That's the area of his game that is just going to decide whether he kind of progresses more towards being a guy who can play more. TLC has that willingness to shoot and that team-mindedness on defense, and that's always going to, I think, give him an opportunity to kind of be in that 11-12 spot on a roster and be a guy that is in the rotation sometimes, not in the rotation time sometimes, depending on injuries, fouls, all that other stuff. But I don't think any team that has serious ambitions is ever going to see TLC as one of their top 9 guys or so. No. But perfectly acceptable in that 11, 12, whatever range.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and that's one that I was trying to make throughout the season when I was getting sort of by proxy yelled at for Jalen not playing in particular. And I went down this road a number of times. We'll get to Jalen in a second, but Jalen, for better or worse, was treated as a big by the Hawks. He was never going to play the 3 this year. That was never going to happen. They said as much multiple times. And, TLC got a lot of flack because he's not a great player. He's not a great player. He's not. But for what they paid, which was a non-guaranteed minimum, he's what you want. He's a guy that can be your 6th wing. If you have 2 injuries, he's going to play for you and not kill you. He's fine. He's not great. He's a willing shooter, like you said. He's defensively, he's not terrible. But there'll be moments when you kind of mentioned his on-ball stuff. Like if he's guarding Jimmy Butler one-on-one, like he's got no chance of doing that. And that's tough. And sometimes he had to have those assignments. It was kind of a weird situation for the Hawks this year at times. So I think the way you described it's perfect. For what you invested, he's what you get. And that's not great. It's not terrible. It's not his fault. He's just kind of fine. And Knox, it's kind of crazy when you think about it. Knox had I think it was 2 or 3 games where he just went nuts in fourth quarters. And in garbage time, just kind of funny. There was the one game during the season where it was not garbage time. He had a big game. But for the year for the Hawks, he shot 19% from 3. I think people kind of forget that because he had those barrages, but he did not want to shoot, and he didn't shoot well in his small sample size with the Hawks. And Knox is an offensive player. As funny as that is, as a former lottery pick, offense is the problem with Knox more than defense is. He's not really a guy who does a lot well on offense right now. He's not a good passer for the position even. He's not that willing of a shooter. If it looks great, it looks great. And he is look, the pedigree is there for Knox as a former the Donald All-American and lottery pick, all that stuff. But I think you got to treat with what he actually is. Plus, they traded for him, yes, but he was really just salary ballast in that trade for Cam Reddish. They might have liked Kevin Knox too as a flyer. That's definitely possible. But that trade, and Travis even said this, that trade was for the pick. It wasn't for Kevin Knox. We can kind of acknowledge that. We'll see if they'll bring him back. But for me, he's a minimum player until he proves otherwise. I think that I could see a team maybe with less aspirations than the Hawks, maybe giving him a little bit more than that as a future-facing play. But if you're the Hawks and you have all this money already spent on a lot of different guys, you can't afford to pay more than the minimum for someone like Kevin Knox as a developmental piece, because that's what he still is. I mean, I know he's been in the league for 4 years, and Knox is only 22. He'll be 23 in August. He's a very young player. He's just for comparison's sake, he's a lot younger than DeAndre Hunter, for instance. He's a really young guy still, but he's still a pure development piece even after 4 years. So that's where we are.
Yep, agreed. I would expect TLC to hope to get a full
same thing. He's looking for a minimum somewhere. Yeah, exactly.
Right, do better than that partially guaranteed. And then Knox, depending upon if I think he's going to be looking at, here's a team that might have a great opportunity for me, but they're not going to give you a guaranteed contract, or this other team that might give you a guaranteed contract that, a lot of teams that will look at a guy like Knox is a team that's bringing in a young guy to play the position, and they're like, we need someone to play the first 25 to 30 games while we're getting our young guy kind of settled in or what have you.
A rebuilding team would make sense for him too, just because you can't rely on him being good.
Yeah, but then he probably knows okay, my job is to hold that spot in the rotation down until the young guy is ready to go, and then I'm out of the rotation. And the good thing about his reputation on the league for getting maybe a contract like that is he's a team guy. There's no question about that. He's not going to give you problems if he's not playing. So, it'll be interesting where both those guys land, but as is my brand, I'm rooting for them to be in as good a situation as possible.
Certainly. No, I agree. And definitely heard good stuff about both those guys. I mean, they seem to get along well in the locker room for both TLC and Knox. And clearly, every roster, most rosters have at least a guy, 2, 3 that are just not part of the future. They're just kind of there for the year. Another example that we'll probably get to in another podcast is Gorgui Dieng this year, who they signed for a very specific role because Okongwu was hurt. And that's why they paid him more than the minimum. They brought him in to be the backup for 30 games. And that was why he was around. He's a vet, all that stuff. And that's just kind of the roster ins and outs throughout the course of an NBA season. Let's just end this with Jalen. Jalen obviously played not a lot. Actually played less than Skylar Mays with the Hawks this year. Played a little bit more than Knox did, but not by much. But he did have great G League numbers. Just for a reference point here for Jalen Johnson, in 21 games for College Park across the 2 sort of mini seasons for the Skyhawks, he averaged 21 points, 11.4 rebounds, 4 assists, and about a steal and a half and a block and a half per game, and shot it decently well from 3, 37%. Only 47% from the floor, which isn't great on huge volume, but not terrible either. Some weird free throw shooting, 58% from the line for Johnson this year. That's a little bit shaky for someone you want to be a better shooter than that, but certainly put up numbers in the G League. Now, I'll let you speak to this too, Glenn, but G League numbers do not necessarily translate always, but you still want him to put those numbers up. And that's what I would say. It doesn't tell you that he's going to be great at the NBA level, but it does tell you that he's able to put up numbers when he's the number 1, number 2 option in the G League at 19 years old. And that's not nothing. The fact that he was able to do that is an encouraging sign for sure. So I don't know if you even saw anything that's worth even talking too much about in Atlanta, but just because he didn't play enough. But the floor is yours on Jalen Johnson.
Yeah, the only thing to note is that when he got more opportunity in the last month of the season, it felt like it was about that. Yeah. That he actually showed that he had learned a lot about where on defense how to function off ball, tagging the roller on time, being at the rim on time, helping at the nail with the dig or a start on time. And so, I mean, when he started the season on a scale of like 1 to 100 on defensive readiness, I would have maybe given him like a 3.
It was
You
low.
know?
Yeah,
It was really low.
And that's
No
why he
idea.
didn't play. Just not to stop you, but I know we
Yep.
talked about this online, offline, but people always ask us, like, why aren't they playing Jalen Johnson? And you can argue with this all you want to if you'd like, but if you're Nate McMillan, that is the reason he wasn't playing, was defensive know-how, experience, awareness, all that stuff. That was the weakness of Jalen Johnson this year.
Right. And then we could talk about how little he played in his 1 year at Duke, right? And other parts of his developmental track coming into there. But that, I mean, I was just really impressed with how far he came in that area. Now, in those games also, there were a few times where the opposing team would put him in the primary action, and he was still really bad in that area, which is going to be a limitation for him. But, a whole summer, hopefully, some time in Vegas, and then hopefully a full camp this year. We're having a, quote, first normal offseason we've had in a while. Could hopefully be a really big deal for him and help him continue to kind of move the needle there. And, it's funny because I imagine you heard the same thing I heard on Twitter all year long is, well, at least he's athletic and at least he can do this and do that. It's just like when I hear that, I feel like people maybe don't understand it. And understandably, like, if you have a guy who's out there making mistakes all the time on defense, it kills you, and it totally frustrates the other 4 guys who are working hard to kind of function from a team defense standpoint. And I know Nate probably takes that as far as any coach in the league in terms of having no tolerance for that, right? And there's, I think, some fair criticism, in that area probably. But at the same time, fans who think like, well, he'll just at least recover from his mistakes with athleticism, that's just not how it works. You've got to have 5 guys who, at a minimum, have all of the basics down pat and are reliable decision makers, communicators, all that stuff. And he was just a long, long way away. So I think he's a lot more ready now from what I saw there. They've got to help him figure out how to function when his guy becomes the screener in the pick and roll. But I don't see any reason he can't make that progress. The one other thing I'll note is that I know you mentioned the free throw percentage in College Park being weird. I don't know this for sure, but he looked like a guy that they were working with his shot and reworking his shot a little bit. Mm-hmm. And you may remember when he came in, his release point is kind of right off his forehead almost, right? And it looks like they were trying to get that release point a little higher. And that can show up when you're in the middle of that reworking the shot. If in fact that's what they were doing, I'm just saying that's what it looked like to me. I don't know that.
It's an idea. Yeah, no.
Right. So the release point looks like they were trying to get it up higher, and that takes time to adjust to. So I don't have any reason to think he's not going to be a fine shooter for an NBA wing.
And that's whatever we're talking about. I was going to say that's actually interesting too, because I wonder also, part of what we talked about, him being tasked to be basically a big all season long. He played the 5 with regularity in College Park. It wasn't a situation where they had him playing the 3 in College Park and then never playing the 3 in Atlanta. He was a big all year long. And I'm not sure if that's an indication of the future or what they thought he could do as a rookie or what. I've kind of thought of him as a 4 primarily as a prospect, with the potential ability to maybe play a little bit of 3 in the future, but also certainly more of a 4. And at the moment, they clearly view him as more of a 4, closer to a 5 than a 3. I'm not sure if that's going to change over the summer. Maybe into next year, they have him playing a little bit more on the perimeter. But that's also worth saying out loud, because that's just, it informs what you're looking at. And this, Glenn, but for listeners' sake, especially at the NBA level, a guy who you've had him practice, and especially even in the G League, only playing the big spots, you can't just have that guy, especially a rookie who's never done it, just suddenly be playing the 3 at the NBA level. That's not realistic. The roles, the jobs are just so much different across the board, on both ends of the floor, to where that would not have been fair to him. So much as I would have liked to seen him play more, I thought they probably could have come into the season with more of a plan to get him some minutes. And for me, it was never going to be like he's in the rotation in capital letters. That was never going to happen for me coming into the year, much less I try to tell people it wasn't going to happen. But like on a night when Gallo was out of the lineup or something, you could have, and they did this a few times, to be fair. Like, and I think you even said this a lot, I'll throw it to you. Like, it was pretty clear to me when they played him they did try to get him ready to play in certain matchups, and they kind of picked and chose where they were going to try him to play. I just wish it had been a little bit more, because look, it's not fair to compare draft slot to how much playing time a guy gets without context, because this year's Hawks team, I know it seems like a long time ago, was supposed to be super deep and super good this year. But you never want to have a top 20 pick play as little as he did, especially when you did have some injuries. It wasn't like the Hawks were 100% healthy all year long. So I kind of get both sides. It didn't bother me as much as it did for other people. I will definitely say that. But they could have been more intentional. And I think that comes potentially from the head coach and his stubbornness, or whatever, however you want to say that. It's the wrong head coach to have him play. It was never going to happen. And I try to say that, but it was just interesting the way they handled it all from start to finish.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, because I wonder sometimes if he might bring more value if he slides more towards the three. And the reason I say that is because so many teams need guys of his size and athleticism that can defend the best, wings in the league, whether it's a Paul George, or, we've thought about LeBron, like, all these years. And, we know Kawhi, we know who those guys are. The teams we're watching right now, it's, Luka, right? So I wondered, like, okay, when we saw him play so much five in College Park, is that the plan? One part of that is that when you're the five, you have to organize, you have to communicate, and they might have just thrown him into that role defensively to force him into a role that demands that of him.
Yeah, good point.
What I say is I think we'll find out in Vegas. I think the position they have him playing in Summer League this year, even if it's only 3 games or 4 or whatever it might be, it probably the full normal load because he played so little last year. But I think we'll get an idea of what their plan is for next season by seeing how they define his role at Vegas, because it makes no sense to play him at 5 in Vegas if he's going to play more 3 and 4 going into the season. So
that was actually one of the things dating back to Summer League when I was there, and it was Matt Hill, who was the Summer League, one of the assistants that was Summer League coach, and I asked him twice during the week, what was the thought process behind Jalen playing so much center? Because he played center and people were surprised by it. And I was trying to be the sort of the conduit for like, look, he's playing center, everybody. Like, pay attention to this. Like, this is not a weird thing. This is clearly intentional. And he kind of talked around it as a coach would, but I thought it was notable then. And then it was like, oh, he's going to play. He's a big right now. And Nate said it a few times. I know Nate, not always like the most dialed in guy to the G League, but like they clearly wanted him organizationally to play the big spots. And I do wonder, like, because you like what you said is a great idea, because him being legitimately 6'8", 6'9", 230 super athlete, if that guy can play the 3 for you, it's a huge luxury if he can do it. And offensively, while he may not be the greatest shooter, especially at the 3, he's comfortable with the ball in his hands. Like he can be a guy who can have the ball a little bit, create his own shot, create for others a little bit. So like, yeah, if you can do it, sure, it would be great to have that depth. And that's, I think, ultimately, you're hoping he could just be like a multi-position guy. And they've said that even at the draft. Travis is like, this guy could play multiple positions. That's great. You have to just wait to maybe try it, or I don't know. Now I'm excited about Summer League because you keep mentioning it, but I'm excited to see what he's going to look like, because clearly he'll be there. Clearly Sharife will be there. I would imagine, there'll be other guys. Shawnee Brown will probably be there as a guy in a 2-way contract. Whoever they draft this year will be there. They'll have guys there. Maybe a Kongwu for like a game or 2. He doesn't need it for me, but if they want to do that, they can. There'll be guys to look at, let's just say, for Summer League. But I still think, though, almost more so than the rookie, whoever they draft, I'll be more interested by Jalen Johnson in a lot of ways, because he should be, at least you're hoping that he's one of those guys that's like too good to be there. You know this, Glenn. Like, there's always like the 10 guys that are like, all right, he doesn't need to play anymore. You're hoping that's Jalen Johnson by like the second game of Summer League.
Yeah, and if he played 500 minutes last year, I think that would be more likely to happen, because he didn't play much at all. I think he'll need all that run. But at the same time, you don't want him playing heavy minutes 3 times in 4 days. You just don't want to risk the injury. So I'm sure they'll workload manage it and all that sort of stuff. But I think for those of us who are anxious to see, like, okay, what is the plan for him from a role position standpoint? Really, this is where I think we'll get the best idea here.
That's a good call, I think. Predictably, Glenn, you and I went longer than I thought, so this is going to wrap up this. This is going to be a part 1 of 2, I guess, in this conversation that we're going to have. But so with that said, please plug everything you got going on. We got going on these 5 guys. We could probably do an hour on Jalen Johnson and Sharife Cooper who wanted to. But Glenn, please feel free to plug any work you have. I know it's player review season at Peachtree Hoops and other places, but what's going on in your life beyond this?
Yeah, so we're wrapping up our player reviews there. I wrote John Collins and Trae Young. It's one of those you probably not mention anything, but as an editor, you'll know that there are some guys that nobody wants to touch. Like I remember, like the first year I was part of player reviews, I signed up for the Dwight Howard player review. It's like nobody wanted to touch that at all.
I remember not wanting to do that. Listen, when I was the editor at Peachtree Hoops, I would always leave stuff open, knowing that I would have to do it if nobody did it. Same with the draft; it's the same thing. There's always a guy or two that nobody wants, and it's like, all right, that's my job. I have to run the ship and write this stuff. So yeah.
So I wrote the JC one, and I wrote the trade one. And the trade ones, I mean, it might sound like it's easy to write, but it's a little challenging to kind of press something up in there. But now we're moving into draft season, and this is the time of year where I start finally getting into the draft class. I've watched a lot of Jaden Ivey this last week and stuff, so I don't know that I'll be writing about him, but I'm getting my arms around the draft class. And then at Willis_Glenn, I'm commenting on these not so close NBA games that we're seeing night to night right now, but still interesting to me. So yeah, Peachtree Hoops and at Willis_Glenn, you can basically catch everything I have going on, and then Kevin and I are still plugging along with ATL 29.
Who's Kevin? No, I'm kidding. Glenn, thank you for joining us on the podcast. As always, for everybody else, please subscribe to the show. We'll have more player capsules. We'll have more NBA draft coverage, et cetera, on the show. So check us out, and we'll see you next time.